Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the velvet-lined madness of royal dining halls, where the silver is polished, the chandeliers are glowing, and your every bite could cause a scandal. You're not just eating, you're performing, you're surviving, you're navigating a world where the wrong chew, the wrong sniff, the wrong sauce can ruin your standing faster than a sword to the gut. And tonight, you're the newest guest at a royal feast. The goblets clink, the pheasants steam, and you, freshly scrubbed, stiff in borrowed brocade, are about to discover that nothing in this palace is weirder than the food. You won't believe this. No one's touched their meal yet, because the Queen hasn't taken a single bite. And until she does, everyone else just smiles hungrily into their soup. All right, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes. And hey, drop your location and tell me what time it is where you are. I love knowing where in the world you're chilling from. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You stand beneath towering ceilings glittering with candlelight, the smell of roast swan wafting through the hall. A massive table stretches into the distance, buried in mountains of food you can't pronounce. You've been summoned to your first court feast, and you have no idea what to expect. What you don't yet know is that you're about to break half a dozen rules without even realizing it. First mistake. You reach for the bread. It's warm, crusty. You've been staring at it for 10 minutes while trying not to drool. So you pluck off a piece, discreetly you think, and lift it to your lips. Across the table someone gasps. You freeze. Did you just commit a crime? Well, almost. Turns out, no one eats before the monarch. Ever. Not even the heir. Not even the archbishop. You're supposed to wait until Her Royal Highness so much as looks at her food. And even then, you don't dig in like you're at a countryside tavern. You begin slowly, gratefully, reverently, as though the boiled turnip on your plate is the body of a saint. Your cheeks burn. You set the bread down. Someone smiles at you kindly. It's a smile that says, "Don't worry, everyone humiliates themselves on the first day." Then, finally, she lifts her spoon. The Queen, draped in layers of velvet ringed by powdered courtiers, raises a single silver spoon and takes a sip of golden broth. The room exhales. Forks clatter softly. The feast has begun. You're safe, for now. But your second mistake comes faster than expected. You compliment the food. "This is incredible," you murmur, forgetting yourself. What is it? The noble next to you stares. Not only are you not supposed to speak during the first course, you also shouldn't ask what's in the food. Why? Because most of it is designed to look impressive, not taste good. And many royals couldn't even identify half the exotic beasts on their plates. The goal wasn't flavour, it was spectacle. You peer again at the meat in front of you, roasted to golden perfection, shaped like a miniature stag. Except, wait, is that fish inside? You cut it open. Indeed. Some poor chef has deboned a trout, stuffed it into the body of a pigeon, and layered it inside a crust shaped like a deer. It's food taxidermy, a feast of illusions. You try not to make a face. You chew politely, wondering if this is going to happen at every meal. Spoiler alert, it is. By the time the third course arrives, some sort of jelly moulded into the shape of a castle, you've already committed your third faux pas. You try to hand a dish down the table to the left. Wrong again. At royal tables, everything moves to the right. Always. This isn't just tradition, it's political order. The person to your left might be of higher status, and you cannot presume to serve them. Down the line, that might suggest you think you're more important than they are. So to the right it goes, even if it means dishes move in loops, bouncing back to their original spot an hour later. You sigh. You chew. You wonder if anyone's actually enjoying the food, or if this whole thing is just an elaborate way to suffer in silence together. The answer? A little of both. Across the table, the king laughs. A duck explodes, on purpose this time, releasing a cloud of spices meant to impress foreign ambassadors. Everyone claps politely as the musicians strike up a tune. And you take another cautious bite. You've survived the first wave, but there's still 19 more rules no one warned you about. You try to settle in. You shift in your chair, though chair may be generous. It's more of a golden cage. You're perched at the edge, back stiff, spine straight, just like the others. Comfort is not part of the menu here. You glance down the line. Platters shimmer under candlelight. Roasted boar stuffed with herbs and sweet apples, sugar-sculpted hedgehogs, candied violets clinging to pyramids of marzipan. You're certain half these dishes were designed by lunatics, or perhaps artists, but don't be fooled. You're not just here to eat, you're here to be seen eating. Everything about this dinner is theatre, the food, the clothes, even the silver goblet you're holding, which is 3 times heavier than necessary and shaped like a lion roaring toward the ceiling. The Queen, you notice, hasn't touched more than a bite of each course. That's another rule. Royals rarely ate heartily at banquets, not because they weren't hungry, but because to finish a plate was to suggest that the court hadn't provided enough. Instead, they sampled, nibbled, left abundance behind as a kind of edible propaganda. You try to mimic her restraint. You slice a sliver from a glazed fruit tart and place it carefully on your tongue. It's surprisingly awful. Apparently this particular recipe came from a distant duchy, and though it's supposed to be a symbol of alliance, it tastes like it was boiled in perfume. You swallow quickly, smile faintly. Your lips stick together from the sugar. Across the table, a young man is sweating. He's been served the wrong dish. You recognize it immediately. Lamprey pie. A status symbol among the English elite, but also a famously slimy and strange delicacy. Think giant aquatic leech encased in pastry. He's poking it with his knife like it might crawl off the plate. He's not allowed to decline. That's the trick. What's served must be eaten. Turning away a dish, even politely, suggests insult. And when that dish comes from the Duke of wherever, and the Duke is seated 3 places to your left, that's not just rude. That's dangerous. So the young man leans in, picks up his fork and takes a bite. His face freezes. You look away to give him the dignity of not watching him gag. You sip from your goblet. It's wine, of course. Water is for peasants, or worse, for people trying to poison you. Here in the court, everything is fermented, sweetened, boiled in honey or vinegar or rose water. Your tongue is starting to feel confused. Then comes the next unexpected moment. A servant approaches your side, leans in quietly and whispers, "Do you require the ewer and basin?" You blink. What? The servant gestures again, more pointedly. Another waiter approaches behind, holding a small ornate bowl and a jug. Ah, hand-washing ritual. You're being offered a moment to cleanse your fingers, because here's the final truth no one tells you until it's too late. You're expected to eat most of this food with your hands. Yes, even the nobility, especially the nobility. In many courts, before forks became acceptable, you were meant to use 3 fingers only: index, middle, and thumb. It's a display of refinement. Using your whole hand is vulgar. Using utensils too much is foreign. So you nod, and the ewer is poured over your fingers, the water caught in the basin, your hands dried with linen as fine as cloud. You feel like a statue being polished. Finally dessert arrives. It's a giant spinning sugar wheel, gilded and glowing under tiny flames. You blink in surprise. No one eats it. It's not meant to be eaten. It's meant to show that your host could afford this much sugar, one of the most expensive goods on earth at the time. As the night winds down, you lean back, stomach tight with nerves more than food. You haven't eaten much, you don't remember the flavours, but you do remember the rules. Rule 1, wait for the monarch. Rule 2, eat what you're served. Rule 3, don't ask too many questions. And Rule 4, never ever assume the feast is for you, because in this world you are the garnish. The next evening you're summoned again, this time to a smaller, more intimate supper. A dozen guests, a tighter table, fewer musicians. The mood should be more relaxed, but the tension in your stomach is worse than ever. You've already learned not to touch the bread, not to eat before the monarch, not to gag when something smells like it came from a candle shop. You think you're ready, and then you see it. A small, elegant utensil laid beside your plate. 2 prongs, gilded, delicate. A fork. You reach for it, but before your fingers close around the handle, the noble to your right inhales sharply. "I wouldn't," he whispers. You freeze. See, depending on what century you're in, and which court you're unlucky enough to dine in, forks are not just frowned upon, they're scandalous. In some places they're outright banned. Why? Because forks were once seen as decadent, foreign and even sinful. To early European minds, especially in devout courts like Venice or Byzantium, the idea of sticking sharp prongs into food, raising it delicately to your mouth like some dainty devil, well, that smacked of pride, of vanity, of luxury. After all, God gave you fingers. Why insult him by refusing to use them? There's even an old whisper that a Byzantine princess who dared to use golden forks at her wedding feast was later struck down with illness as divine punishment. Never mind that she probably just caught something from the roast goose, so you slowly pull your hand back. The fork stays untouched. A waiter removes it discreetly a few moments later, like hiding the evidence of a failed rebellion. Meanwhile, you're watching everyone else around the table. Most people are using their fingers, yes, but some are using knives with alarming confidence. Personal knives, pulled from belts, with engraved handles and jewelled pommels. You realise with a chill that in many courts, especially before the Renaissance, each guest brought their own knife to dinner. Cutlery wasn't provided by the host. Your eating tool was a personal item, like a ring or a dagger. And yes, sometimes it was both. That knife served 2 purposes, to cut your food and to defend your honour. There are stories, too many, honestly, of feasts that turned into duels over seating arrangements, salt etiquette, or the last plum tart. So you eat with caution, 3 fingers only, bite-sized portions, elbows tucked, then you hear it, a wet splat. You turn your head and spot the Duchess of something or other attempting to slice into a roasted pear. It slips, skitters, lands with comic finality on the floor, and still no one reaches for a fork, not even to help. Because in this court the fork is more dangerous than the knife. You remind yourself not to look amused, not to offer help, not to make eye contact with the pear. Instead, you bow your head slightly and pretend you saw nothing. Because the worst mistake isn't using the wrong utensil, it's using the right one. At the wrong table. You spend the rest of the meal obsessing over your hands. Are they clean enough? Is your pinky too involved? Did someone just see you use your ring finger to anchor the cheese? The rules seem to shift depending on who's watching. Across from you, an older noblewoman is daintily tearing apart a pigeon leg with 2 fingers and all the poise of a surgeon. Not a drop of grease on her sleeve, not a smear on her lips. How does she do it? You glance down at your own hands, now glossed with honey from the baked figs, and wonder if you've just committed another invisible sin. Then the Lord Chancellor sneezes, not a dainty cough, a booming, unrepentant explosion that startles 2 musicians and sends a spoon clattering. You wait for someone to react, apologize, cover, anything. But the man simply nods at his soup like nothing happened. And that's when it hits you. Table manners aren't about cleanliness. They're about control. A royal table is a test. Can you stay still? Stay silent. Maintain grace under the assault of 1,000 stimuli, noise, smells, textures, stares. Can you navigate politics with a mouthful of oversalted eel? You reach for your wine. That's safe, right? Except it isn't. Because now comes a toast. And not just any toast, but the ritual of the toast, which must be initiated, accepted, returned, and timed precisely. You're supposed to hold your goblet at a specific angle. Make eye contact. Nod once, not twice. The monarch toasts first, then the honoured guest, then the ambassador. If someone toasts you and you're chewing, wait until you can swallow before raising your glass. Toasting mid-bite is a sign of vulgarity. Or worse, impatience. It's exhausting. You gulp the wine too fast and nearly choke. Another faux pas. Drinking greedily shows a lack of discipline. The court prefers sipping. You attempt a smile. Later, as the meal winds down, you're offered a small pastry. Sweet, folded, delicate. But you pause. Because this particular treat, called a morsel of favour, has layers of meaning. In some courts, to accept it signals loyalty. In others, it means you're available for courtship. And in a few unlucky regions, it's just bait. To test if you'll take what hasn't been formally offered. You decline. You've learned enough for one night. Back in your chambers, your fingers still smell faintly of roast and rosewater. You think about the fork, that simple, innocent fork, banned, mistrusted, blamed for arrogance, denounced by popes and patriarchs alike. It's hard to believe something so small could carry so much fear. But that's the pattern, isn't it? In royal courts, nothing is small. Every gesture is a message. Every bite a statement. Even silence has weight. And so, you close your eyes, grateful to have survived another meal without disgrace. Tomorrow, they'll serve something new. Maybe gilded apples, maybe pie filled with larks and nightingales, maybe nothing at all, but whatever it is, you'll eat it with your fingers, and you won't touch the fork. The next time you walk into the Great Hall, you expect roast duck, velvet drapes, and the same polished routine of silver platters and whispered side-eyes. But today, the smell hits you first. Sweet, smoky, pungent, with a faint note of something. Burnt, perfumed. It's hard to tell. Then you see it. A massive swan. But not just any swan. This one is roasted, stuffed, sewn back into its skin, and dressed again in its own feathers. Its neck is arched high, wings outspread like it's about to take flight. Gilded, glittering. Its beak is dipped in gold, and it's dead as marble. You freeze mid-step, because this is not food. This is theatre. Across the hall, others are gawking too, but politely. Because if you stare too long, you risk showing ignorance. And in a royal court, ignorance is just embarrassment wearing lace. A servant steps forward and slices a thin piece from the swan's underside. You catch a glimpse. The skin is crisp and dark. Inside, the flesh looks dry, almost grey. You try not to cringe. The truth is, swan meat isn't known for its flavour. Even in its heyday, it was more decoration than delicacy, like serving a Fabergé egg and pretending it's lunch. The goal isn't taste, it's to impress, to shock, to display wealth so ludicrous it borders on blasphemy. You remember hearing once that in Henry VIII's time, they didn't stop at swans. They served peacocks the same way, roasted and redressed in full feather, sometimes even with fireworks stuffed in their beaks for a dramatic entrance. No one expected you to eat the head, or the tail, or really any part of it. The point was that it appeared on the table, gleaming and insane, and proved that your host could afford to kill something beautiful just to show off. You glance at the dais, where the monarch sits calmly, slicing through a gilded pheasant with all the enthusiasm of a tax auditor. You've barely begun your own course, a pie shaped like a Tudor rose, when another dish rolls in. And this one takes your breath away. It's a cockantrice, half pig, half bird, sewn together. The top is a rooster's chest with clawed legs and outstretched wings. The bottom is a suckling pig, roasted brown and scored in spirals. The seam is stitched shut with bright red thread. It looks like it was born in a nightmare and raised in a pastry kitchen. You lean closer. The pig's eyes are painted with something shiny. Egg yolk, glaze. The beak of the rooster is open, revealing cloves for teeth. Inside the mouth, an olive. You don't ask why. And the smell, it's overwhelming. The pig is stuffed with minced lamb and saffron. The rooster with almond paste and dates. You can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Everyone pretends this is normal. Everyone carves carefully. You do the same. You fork a tiny portion, just enough to seem polite, and bring it to your lips. It tastes confused, sweet, savoury, clashing textures. You chew, swallow, smile faintly, and realise this dish isn't about pleasure. It's about dominance over nature, about fusing animals into unnatural forms, turning the grotesque into elegance. Because in these courts, the more unnatural the meal, the more powerful it made the host appear. You try to focus on the next course, something safer, maybe a tart or a broth, but they bring out another creature. This one is smaller, a hedgehog, you think, until you realise it's marzipan, a dessert shaped to look like an animal, spines made of toasted almonds, beady currant eyes. You breathe a quiet sigh of relief. At least this monster won't bleed. A child near the end of the table squeals with delight. She pokes it with a spoon and giggles. The adults offer tight-lipped smiles. It's cute, sure, but in this room, even sugar has politics. Because here's what no one tells you. In many royal courts, the cook is an illusionist. A pie that meows when opened? Seen it. A roast that explodes with live doves? Common. A pastry filled with fake coins, fish eggs, dyed rice and sculpted fingers. If it can be imagined, it's been served. Especially if it's disgusting, expensive or impractical. One chronicler once described a banquet where the head of a boar was stuffed with singing birds, literally engineered to emit music from its throat. Not real music, of course, just a squealing, fluttering chaos. But the nobles applauded anyway. It's a strange kind of logic. The more the meal resembles a madman's dream, the higher the status of the host. And if you think that logic has a limit, you're wrong. You glance down at your own plate and realise you've been served a meat jelly shaped like a castle. Towers, battlements, even a moat made from aspic dyed blue. Inside, slivers of goose and mushroom float like prisoners. The server instructs you, gently, to scoop from the west tower first, because apparently even the geography of your jelly matters. You obey. It wobbles unsettlingly. You wonder if the roof is made of fish skin. You don't ask. Across the hall, a platter collapses under its own weight. A sugar sculpture of St. George fighting a dragon splits in half and sends one poor servant scrambling with a broom. Everyone pretends not to notice. The music gets louder. You chew another bite of Goose Castle. It's cold, gelatinous, slightly metallic. You're not even sure if the flavour is intentional. And then comes the grand moment. A marching roast. Yes, marching. A mechanical contraption. Half dish, half puppet. Carried in by servants and slowly rotated by a hidden wheel. On top, a roast capon, golden and glossy, rides a silver chariot drawn by crusted sugar horses. One of the horses loses a leg mid-trot. No one reacts. The monarch raises a hand. The music stops. A knife is drawn, not by a servant but by a guest of honour who must perform the ceremonial first cut. Not just cut, but carve with grace, with poetry, with respect. In fact, in some courts, a carving master held a permanent role, trained not in cooking, but in theatrically slicing food for maximum symbolism. One wrong angle, one uneven slice, that's not just clumsy, that's embarrassing the crown. So you hold your breath as the guest cuts clean through the capon's spine. Applause, a nod from the queen, a servant sweeps up the sugar horse leg, and the meal rolls on. Later that night, you dream of animal hybrids and collapsing towers, of birds bursting from pastry crusts and jellies that rearrange themselves when you're not looking. You wake up hungry, not because the food wasn't rich, but because in this court nothing you ate was meant to satisfy. It was meant to impress, to intimidate, to confuse, to declare power through spectacle, and if you left full, that was a lucky accident. You're starting to understand something unnerving about these royal meals. They're not built around hunger, they're built around rules, around rituals, around silence, performance, power, and today's ritual is no exception. It's Friday, which doesn't mean much to you until you see the menu. No meat, no chicken, no lard, just fish. Fish and pies, fish and jellies, fish with raisins. Fish served cold, hot, smoked, dried, baked, fried, or just floating uncomfortably in almond milk. You glance around, hoping someone else looks as disoriented as you feel. But no, everyone's used to it. They've been doing this for years, because in royal courts, especially across medieval Europe, Friday was fish day. Not just a religious tradition, but a legally enforced one. Yes, enforced. By law. In places like Tudor England, you could be fined or even punished for failing to observe fish days. Not because the king was a religious fanatic, though some were, but because it helped boost the fishing industry. A brilliant political move dressed in sacred robes. You stare down at your plate, salted cod. Again. You've had it 4 ways already this week. The servant pours a thin sauce over it, something involving cinnamon and parsley, and nods respectfully. You nod back, but your expression is probably closer to resigned hostage than grateful noble. The cod is dry, the sauce is sour, the bread is stale, on purpose. It's been dried to act like a spoon. You chew, slowly, and try to remember how this started. Long before kings turned fish into law, fasting from meat on Fridays was a Catholic practice meant to show humility and sacrifice. Meat symbolized feasting, pleasure, indulgence. Fish, by contrast, came from water. It was seen as cleaner, more modest. But eventually, monarchs saw a loophole. They realized if they mandated fish eating, they could manipulate demand, boost domestic industries, feed more people cheaply, control supply chains. So suddenly everyone from the Queen to the chimney sweep was eating eels on Friday, and you're now discovering the limits of eel cuisine, because there's a second dish in front of you, a stew. It smells slightly sweet, which is confusing until you take a bite. Eel and fig. You pause, swallow. It's not awful, but it's a combination you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy's dinner guest. Compliments of the Bishop of Durham, a server whispers. Ah, that explains it. In many courts, powerful churchmen sent fish dishes as edible reminders of their influence. A religious meal, yes, but also a social chess move. You couldn't insult the dish without insulting the sender. So you smile, take a second bite, nod thoughtfully. Pretend to enjoy the sticky sweetness clinging to the back of your throat, and the meal trudges forward. Course after course, the fish parade continues. There's trout moulded into the shape of a pomegranate. There's a massive sturgeon crusted with saffron and stuffed with herbs. There's a pie filled with tiny fried smelts that leap like silver confetti when sliced. Someone at the end of the table sneezes. You almost cheer, just for the chaos, but you stay composed. You chew the smelt pie politely. You sip your rosewater. You accept a tiny gelatinous square of carp jelly, which trembles in your spoon like a coward. And you realize, this isn't dinner, it's obedience. You look around and realize no one seems satisfied. Not full, not joyful, just aligned, synchronized. Each person takes tiny bites of their prescribed fish dish, as if they're actors in a slow-moving play. And maybe that's what it is, a performance of piety, because the fish isn't the point. The point is that you're obeying, publicly, gracefully, that you're part of a ritual larger than yourself. And that's when it happens. A plate arrives in front of the queen, round, silver, steaming slightly. She lifts the lid, and you see it, a glistening hunk of white meat, richly glazed and fragrant. It's not fish, it's capon. The queen narrows her eyes, says nothing, and replaces the lid. A servant quickly removes the offending dish. No one breathes. The mistake has been made, a breach of the sacred Friday rule. Even if it was accidental, someone in the kitchen is going to lose their job, or worse, their ears. You watch the queen carefully. She dabs her lips with a napkin, sips her wine. The court resumes its rhythm. But the message is clear. Tradition must not be broken. You glance back at your own plate. Now something entirely new has appeared. A slab of white, quivering mass. Cold, translucent. You poke it. It wobbles. Lamprey jelly, servant murmurs. A delicacy. You're not so sure, but you remember the rule. What's served must be eaten, so you brace yourself, lift the spoon, and take the bite. It's indescribable, like someone cooked leather in perfume and chilled it. You fight the urge to shudder, and just when you think it can't get weirder, you spot the royal fish taster at the far end of the hall. A pale, wiry man in green velvet, who eats each fish dish before it reaches the monarch. His face is blank, professionally unreadable. He eats, swallows, waits 30 seconds. Only then is the dish permitted to travel. That's his job, to die first if it comes to that. You wonder how many tasters the crown has gone through this year, or if they rotate like executioners. And for a moment it dawns on you. These Friday fish feasts aren't just rituals. They're acts of survival. Not just yours, but the monarchy's, the church's, the entire fragile structure of tradition and fear and obedience, all balanced on a fillet of cod. The queen doesn't look hungry, but she eats anyway. One bite, then stops. The rest of you follow her rhythm like clockwork. One bite, then stillness. One sip, then silence. Outside, the bell of the chapel rings softly. Inside, a dozen courtiers pretend the lamprey jelly was delicious, and you do the same, because that's what the court demands. Not honesty, not flavour, but loyalty through food, even when that food is gelatinous, cold, and possibly trying to slide off your plate. You press your fork down gently. The jelly surrenders, and the feast goes on. Tonight, there's something different in the air. Not the usual stew of cinnamon, candle wax, and slow-roasting meat. Something sharper. Tension. You're back in the grand dining hall. The goblets gleam. The silver shines. But every movement feels more cautious. Every glance more rehearsed. You soon find out why. Tonight's meal is being served under watch. 2 men in red velvet doublets stand near the kitchen entrance. Their hands rest on their belts. Not near swords, but small velvet pouches. Poison testers. And just beyond them, standing almost invisibly in the shadows, is the royal food taster. Again. The same man from the Friday fish feast. Pale. Hollow-eyed. His expression is unreadable, like a mask carved from wax. He steps forward, takes a bite from the queen's soup, waits, doesn't blink. Only when a full minute passes does the queen lift her spoon. That's when it sinks in. Every bite in this palace might be your last. Poisoning isn't some whisper from spy novels. It's real. It's common. In certain royal courts, especially Renaissance Italy and 16th century France, poisoning was practically a political tool. Alliances ended over venison. Kingdoms fell because of a sugared plum. And right now, the people at this table are acting like every grape might explode. You notice the salt cellar near your elbow. Ornate, heavy, ivory. Salt was once so valuable it had its own security protocols. Servants carried it to the table under guard, because it wasn't just seasoning, it was a signal of trust. Which is ironic, because no one here trusts anyone, especially not the kitchen. There are layers of protection between the food and the monarch. First, the ingredients are inspected. Then the kitchen staff must sample their own work. Next, the dish is tasted by the official poison tester, then by a steward. Then it's carried to the queen, covered, sealed, and flanked by guards, and only then is it placed before her. You suddenly understand why some monarchs preferred simple meals in private. The risk of assassination via garlic sausage was just too high. You reach for your wine, slowly, carefully. A server bows, then pours you a different cup from a different jug. "House wine," he says, "for guests only." You nod, but now you're wondering, who poured his wine? You glance at the monarch again. She's barely eating, just tasting, testing. You follow her lead. Small sips, tiny bites, just enough to look respectful, not enough to die for. Across the hall, someone coughs. Everyone freezes. Even the musicians stop. It's nothing. A crumb, maybe. A dry throat. But that's all it takes. A simple sound to ripple fear down 100 spines. Because at this table, death can arrive in a pastry shell, and everyone knows it. The tension lingers like smoke. No one dares speak above a whisper. Even the scraping of a spoon against porcelain feels rude, almost violent. You keep your eyes on your plate. Something soft, white, trembling slightly. Almond cream? A custard? You don't know, and you don't ask, because even curiosity can be suspicious. The less you know, the safer you are. The food taster, still standing in the shadows, chews methodically, swallows, waits, moves on to the next dish. You wonder what he's paid. You wonder if it's enough. Historically, it probably wasn't. Most food tasters were servants, or lower nobles looking to climb. A few were prisoners, offered their lives in exchange for daily doses of potential doom. You try to imagine doing that job. Every day. Mouthful by mouthful, hoping you don't bite into betrayal. It makes your own meal feel heavier, even though you're only pretending to eat now. And then the main course arrives. Game bird, skin glazed, wings tucked. It looks safe, familiar, until the lid is removed and the scent hits you. Cloves, vinegar, bitter herbs, strong, overwhelming. The servant explains gently that the spices are not for taste, they're for protection. Some herbs were believed to neutralize poison, others mask the taste. Royals often demanded their meals be over-seasoned to make tampering harder to detect. Of course, that didn't always work. There's an old tale from the court of Louis XIV. His sister-in-law reportedly died after eating candied orange peel laced with arsenic. Sweet, fragrant, deadly. You take a bite of the game bird. Just the edge. It's dry. The sauce is thick, dark, almost medicinal. You glance at the queen. She eats nothing. Not one morsel. She just smiles. Talks softly to a duke on her left. Her hands never touch the food, and yet every plate is brought to her first. Tasted. Approved. Positioned just so. That's the paradox. The person most likely to be poisoned is also the least likely to eat. You continue your slow performance, sip, smile, Swallow air when you can. And then something unexpected happens. A servant, clearly new, places a dish before the Queen without clearance. A ripple of alarm spreads through the hall. The head steward stiffens. Guards step forward. The Queen doesn't move. The taster rushes forward, snatches the dish, tastes it instantly. Everyone waits. Seconds tick by. Nothing. He nods. Pale, but alive. The dish is removed. The servant is gone a moment later. Quietly. No one mentions it. No one explains. That's how these things go. Later, you hear whispers. He was reassigned to the stables. Some say he was sent to a monastery. Others say he wasn't sent anywhere at all. And just like that, dinner resumes. Dessert arrives. A sugared pear, sliced and fanned like a peacock tail. You don't touch it. Not because it's poisoned, probably, but because you've learned something more important. In royal courts, food is never just food. It's strategy. It's theatre. It's a weapon sheathed in sugar and gold leaf, and every meal is a gamble, even when the dice are hidden under crystal bowls. You wake up with a headache, not from wine, not from lack of sleep, but from something subtler, stranger. Salt. More specifically, the ceremony of salt. Last night at the feast you noticed the salt cellar, not just because it was massive, carved ivory inlaid with gold, but because of where it sat. Not in the centre of the table, not passed from hand to hand like bread. No, it was placed with deliberate care, just right of the monarch. And that's when you learn the truth. Your entire status at court can be measured by your position relative to the salt. Above the salt, they call it. That's the zone closest to the king or queen. That's where the nobility sit, the power players, the family, the favourites. Below the salt, that's the outer orbit. Guests, distant cousins, diplomats on thin ice. You were somewhere in the murky middle. Just far enough that you weren't invited to speak, but close enough that if you sneezed, someone important might flinch. It wasn't just symbolic, it was enforced. You couldn't lean across the salt to speak to someone on the other side. You couldn't help yourself to it unless it was offered, and God help you if you moved it without permission. Salt in this world is more than seasoning. It's sacred, and in some courts, it's locked away between meals. Back at breakfast now, you notice it again. A small silver box beside the eggs. It takes you a second to recognise it. Salt, again, but this time in a tightly sealed container. No spoon, just a lid and a key held by the steward. No shaking, no sprinkling. A pinch, if granted. A grain, if you're lucky. You're reminded that centuries ago salt was so precious it was traded ounce for ounce with gold. That Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salt, salarium, which is where the word salary comes from. That empires were built on it. Wars started because of it. Routes carved across deserts to fetch it. And here you are, afraid to ask for a pinch on your fish. You poke your egg, bland, watery. You sigh. But someone above the salt chuckles. He's been given a generous mound. His bacon glistens. His eggs sparkle like sunlight on a winter road. You glance at your neighbour's plate. Hers looks like yours. Dull. Flat. She's also watching the salt. Eyes narrowed slightly. It's not jealousy. Exactly. It's more like recognition. Because salt is rank. And you're starting to taste the difference. By midday you can't stop thinking about it. That one small pile of salt, glittering beside the Duke of whatever, as if it had been mined straight from Olympus and delivered on a lace doily. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. You're not here for salt. You're here to survive. Blend in. Climb if you're lucky. But then comes lunch. A modest meal, you're told. Informal. Just close company and quiet conversation. That's what they say. But the moment you step into the chamber, you realise nothing in a royal household is ever informal. The table is smaller, yes, the room less gilded, but the salt cellar is still there, perched like a crown jewel between the Queen and her advisor. You're seated 3 places down, not quite below the salt, but not above it either, right on the cusp. The meal begins, pottage, bread, a strange meat you don't recognise, and again, it's all bland, underseasoned, careful. You keep your expression neutral, but you notice something new. No one is reaching for the salt, because you don't reach for the salt. You wait for it to be offered. It's a test. The Queen lifts her spoon, tastes, frowns almost imperceptibly. Then, with a flick of 2 fingers, she nudges the salt cellar slightly toward her advisor. He pinches a bit, passes it onward, to the next, then the next. It reaches you. Your heart actually pounds. Do you take some? A pinch? A grain? Too much, and you look greedy. Too little, and you look ungrateful. If your hand shakes, that'll be remembered. If you spill it, you may as well leave the country. You reach, slowly, gently, 1 finger and thumb. You lift, sprinkle, just enough to feel it melt on your tongue. It's absurd, being nervous over salt. And yet here in this quiet little room, it feels like the most powerful substance on earth. Because it's not just about flavour, it's about access. Some medieval courts had a great salt, an elaborate container used only during major banquets, carved, jewelled and kept in its own box between uses. It was placed before the most honoured guest, who alone had the right to use it. Everyone else got second-tier salt, or none at all. You've heard of nobles getting into arguments over placement at the table, not because they wanted to sit near the monarch, but because they wanted to be above the salt. Even Shakespeare references it. In Taming of the Shrew, a character mocks another by asking if they sit above the salt. The insult is subtle, but brutal. Back at your table, the salt cellar is now moving down the line, slowly, with reverence. A young noble sneezes into his sleeve. The salt skips him. No one says anything, but you can see it on his face. He knows. That grain of salt was more than seasoning. It was belonging. And for 1 flickering moment, you had it. You tasted it. And it tasted like power. You've had peacock pies, swan sculptures, fish that pretended to be fruit, but nothing prepares you for this. You walk into the Queen's Solar for a mid-afternoon meal, a quieter affair, with sunlight streaming through leaded windows and cushions stacked in corners. At first it seems pleasant, a table of soft cheeses, poached pears, stewed plums with honey, delicate things that smell like comfort. Then you're handed your personal plate, and every single item on it is white. White bread, white cheese, white jelly, pale fish in a pale sauce. Even the wine, if you can call it that, is clear as glass, as though someone soaked a grape in rainwater and called it vintage. You pause, look around. It's not a coincidence. Every guest has been given the same, and no one seems surprised. This is the white meal, a tradition among certain royal courts, most famously in 14th century France under Charles VI. No spices, no colours, no bold flavours, just paleness, a feast of deliberate blandness. Why? That depends on whom you ask. Some say it was a health ritual. White foods believed to soothe the body, cool the humours, balance the soul. Others insist it was political, a display of purity, of control. No indulgence, no scandal, just restraint, dressed in cream and linen. But there's a whisper, quiet, never written down, that it was also used to signal mourning, or anxiety, or fear, that a white meal meant something had happened, or was about to happen. You take a bite of the white cheese. It's smooth, cool, tasteless. You chew slowly, but it disappears from your mouth like fog. Across from you, someone pours a white broth over their poached fish. You catch the scent, almond and barley water. It smells like illness. No one is talking. The queen lifts her goblet, sips, then stares out the window as if she's waiting for something. The light shifts, the mood thickens, and the table becomes a canvas of silence. You're not sure if you're supposed to be eating or meditating. Every bite disappears without memory. The white jelly is soft and flavourless. The white bread crumbles like dust. Even the white pears, simmered in milk and rice water, taste like distant thoughts rather than food. And that's the point. This isn't a meal. It's a statement. A performance of control so rigid, so absolute, that even colour has been banished from the table. It reminds you of how some monks fast in silence, not because they hate food, but because abstaining from pleasure is a kind of power. And here too, blandness becomes authority. But the longer you sit at the table, the more it feels like a warning, like the court is holding its breath, like the queen is waiting to see who breaks first. Then someone does. A noble down the table coughs, clears his throat, then dares to speak. "Is there salt?" he whispers. The silence that follows is deafening. You freeze mid-chew. The queen turns, not sharply, not angrily, just turns, slowly, her face unreadable. The noble withers like a grape in the sun, because everyone knows you do not flavour the white meal. You do not ask for heat, or colour, or variation. The white is total. It is law. And you realise this isn't just about the food. It's about what isn't being said. Something has shifted. Perhaps a death at court. Perhaps an illness the queen doesn't want to name. Perhaps a betrayal. You've heard rumours, of course. Everyone has. But at this table, the only clue is the absence of flavour. Your tongue feels tired. You haven't chewed anything substantial in 20 minutes. The fish flaked apart on the first glance. The broth melted in your mouth before you could form an opinion. And now, the final course arrives. White custard with silver leaf. It looks like snow under moonlight. You take a bite. It's cold, sweet, quiet. And just as you set your spoon down, the queen rises. No signal, no speech, just a soft brush of silk and a nod. The room follows. Chairs scrape softly. The servants enter to clear the plates, gently, reverently, like they're handling relics from a holy shrine. You exit the room in silence. Later in the hallway, someone dares to whisper, "Was it for the Duke?" Someone else murmurs, "Or the treaty?" You don't ask. You don't guess. You don't even nod. Because here, in the world of white meals, speculation is more dangerous than hunger. You return to your chambers with an empty stomach and a strange heaviness. You've just eaten 6 courses, but it feels like you've swallowed a secret. By now you've mastered the silent chewing, the staged reactions, the salt rituals, and even the taste of eel and almond water. But there's one rule no one ever explains directly. You only learn it when it's too late. You're never ever supposed to let people see you chew. Not at court, not in public, and especially not when the monarch is watching. It doesn't matter if the food is sticky, stringy, chewy, or requires 6 bites per swallow. In the presence of royalty, you're expected to consume it with the elegance of a breeze slipping through a window. No jaw movement, no teeth flashing, no bulging cheeks. Just smooth, delicate bites, disappearing behind lips that barely move. Today's feast seems ordinary at first. A midday affair after the Queen's Morning Council. Fewer guests, fewer guards. You're hopeful. But then you're seated, and you realise your mistake. You've been placed opposite the throne, direct line of sight. This is not a place of honour, it's a test. The food arrives. A roast of some sort. Pork, maybe, wrapped in pastry. It looks simple enough. You cut a bite, lift your fork, place it in your mouth, and then you feel it. It doesn't break. The pastry is tough. The meat inside is dry. You have to chew, and chew again, and again. You can feel the muscles in your jaw twitching, the way your cheeks rise and fall. You try to minimize it. Turn your head slightly, cover your mouth with your napkin. But it's too late. You glance up and see the Queen looking directly at you. Not unkindly, not even disapprovingly, just looking. And suddenly you remember the countless stories. How Queen Elizabeth had dined in semi-public, but never allowed anyone to see her eat. How Louis XIV held court over enormous meals, but only took tiny theatrical bites, then excused himself for private dining. How to chew in public was to be vulnerable, to be animal, and royals had to be more than human. You swallow. It hurts, but you make it go down. Then you set your fork down and choose a different tactic. Drink. Sip the broth. Soft. Silent. Safe. You glance around. Most others are doing the same. It hits you all at once. This entire meal has been engineered for silence. The food is soft. Custards, mousses, potages, poached fruits. Nothing that crunches. Nothing that sticks. Nothing that requires vigorous chewing. Even the bread is spongy, almost cake-like. Pre-sliced. No tearing. No gnawing. This isn't just elegance. It's strategy. Because in the presence of royalty, sound becomes a liability. A chew too loud, a slurp too sudden. It draws attention. And in court, attention is risk. You spot the man beside you. Old, high-ranking, careful. He takes a bite of the pottage, lips closed, jaw nearly motionless. You wouldn't even know he was eating if not for the slow blink between spoons. Then you hear it. A crunch. A very slight but very real crunch. Everyone hears it. Everyone pretends they didn't. But heads shift, ever so subtly. Eyes flick. You track it. The sound came from a young lord near the end of the table. He bit into something. An almond, perhaps, hidden in a honeyed dumpling. He's frozen now. He knows. A servant appears behind him, gently places a napkin on the table. That's all. Nothing is said. But when the next course is served, his plate is missed. He's not dismissed. Not publicly. But his punishment is clear. He will not be offered the next dish. You want to scream. Not for him. For yourself. For the sheer pressure of it all. But you don't. Instead, you take your next bite the way you've seen the Queen do it. Small, seamless, practically invisible. You let the spoon linger just long enough to cool the food, then press it to your lips and let the flavour slide in. You barely move your mouth. The food disappears without a sound, and just like that, you pass the test. Not because you're full, you're not, but because you looked like you ate. Because no one saw you masticate, struggle, or drip. You remember an old tale you once heard in a corridor, that in the Russian court, one empress was so obsessed with silent dining that she had silk-lined forks made just in case silver might clink too loudly on porcelain. You used to laugh at that story. Now it feels like perfect logic. You glance at your plate. There's barely anything left. But it might as well have been air. You don't even remember the flavour, and that's the final irony. In trying so hard to eat like royalty, you've forgotten how to taste. You return to the table the next night hoping, just hoping for something more human. Something warm, hearty, maybe even a little messy. Instead, you're handed a small ornate cup, heavy, encrusted with jewels. You lift the lid, expecting wine or maybe spiced broth. But inside is nothing. Nothing you're supposed to drink anyway. Because this, dear guest, is not a drinking cup. This is a spit cup. Yes, you heard that right. A polished, custom-made vessel, designed specifically for the most delicate of bodily functions, discreetly getting rid of food you aren't allowed to swallow. You're too stunned to respond. Across the table, a gentleman lifts his own spit cup, gently tilts his head, spits a small morsel inside with all the grace of a violinist setting down a bow. No sound, no shame, just etiquette. And suddenly you realise this is standard. In many royal courts, especially those of 17th century France and Austria, spitting at the table was not only accepted but encouraged. Not openly, not rudely, but behind fans, into napkins, into beautiful little vessels like the one in your hand. Because the royal mouth, you see, must never be seen to struggle. If a cut of meat is too tough, spit it. If a bone slips into your mouth, spit it. If a taste offends the Queen's refined palate, out it goes, not with a cough, not with a grimace, with a flick of the wrist, a dab of the napkin, a barely perceptible deposit into the cup. You're handed a small square of lavender-scented cloth, your discreet veil, one courtier calls it. Apparently you're meant to use this to conceal your motion, to raise it casually, cover your lips, and discard the unwanted bit. You stare at the food on your plate. Suddenly every bite feels like a test. That roasted quail thigh? What if the bone cracks? That pickled root? What if it's too sour? That sugared chestnut? What if it sticks to your teeth mid-smile? You reach for your spoon instead. Broth is safe. No bones in broth. But even the broth has a twist. Tiny slivers of meat swim beneath the surface. Shiny, slippery, unpredictably shaped. You chew carefully, slowly. You make it through, for now. Then the main course arrives. A whole songbird, roasted, head still on. You blink. You've seen strange things on royal platters before. Peacocks with their feathers reattached, pies full of live birds, roasted pig sewn onto geese. But this is intimate, personal. A tiny bird no larger than your hand, roasted whole, legs curled in, beak open as if in protest. It lies in a pool of dark syrup, wine, maybe, or blood, or both. You glance at the others. They're already preparing. Napkins are raised, heads bowed slightly, hands cupped around faces. You copy them, unsure of what happens next. The courtier beside you lifts the bird delicately, places the whole thing in his mouth, and vanishes behind his napkin. You hear nothing, no chew, no crunch. Then, with the skill of someone who's done this far, too often, he removes only the cleaned bones from his mouth and deposits them into his spit cup, along with the tiniest cough to signal, complete. You stare down at your own bird. This is ortolan. You'd heard rumours that it's illegal in some kingdoms, that it's sacred in others, that you're supposed to eat it whole, bones, flesh, organs, skin, in a single bite, while covering your head with a napkin, not out of shame, but to trap the soul of the bird as it leaves your body. That part may be folklore, or not. Who knows anymore? But you do as they do. You raise your napkin, lift the bird, close your eyes, bite down. Crunch. The bones give way. The flavour floods your mouth. Rich, bitter, oily, overwhelming. Your instincts revolt. Your body twitches, but you stay still. You chew. The meat melts into something metallic. The bones prick slightly at the roof of your mouth, and then, slowly you spit. Napkin raised. Dignity intact. Into the cup. You feel nothing but relief. Then comes dessert. Candied orange peels. Beautiful. Glowing. Arranged in curls on a crystal plate. But now even that feels dangerous. Too sweet. Too fragrant. Wasn't there a princess poisoned with candied peels? Or was it marmalade? You can't remember. You choose one. Let it dissolve slowly on your tongue, and keep your napkin ready, just in case. Later that evening, You find a small cabinet in the hall filled with polished silver cups. You realise they're cleaned and reused, carefully numbered and tracked, because even spit in this court is protocol. And the body? The body must behave like a diplomat. Every chew, every swallow, every cough, negotiated. You don't remember what anything tasted like, but you'll never forget that tiny bird, its silence, and the sound your own mouth made as you swallowed it whole. This morning you're hungry, not just peckish, truly hungry. After days of mouthing paper-thin jellies, dodging poison plums, and whispering into napkins, you crave something solid. Honest. Bread, perhaps. Warm, crusty, rude bread. And, miracle of miracles, it's there. On the table, a full basket of it. Round loaves, braided buns, thick slabs of rye. The smell alone nearly makes you weep. You reach out. But halfway there you stop. Because the others, they don't touch it. Not yet. The bread, you realise, is not yours. Not really. Not for you. In many royal courts, bread was symbolic, ceremonial, even hierarchical. Some loaves were meant to be seen but not touched. Others were placed on the table simply to show that the court was generous, even if no one ate them. And more often than not, the best bread wasn't eaten at all. It was collected after the feast, placed into baskets, and handed out to the poor, or more precisely to favoured servants, guards, and clerics, who would later fight over it behind closed doors. To eat that bread now, that would be stealing from the chain of command. So you lower your hand, quietly, casually, as if you'd only been reaching for your napkin. Moments later, a servant swoops in, removes one of the loaves and places it on a separate tray, marked, measured, tagged for redistribution. And then you're handed a different kind of bread. Pale, thin, crumbly, trencher bread. You've heard of this. It's not meant to be eaten. It's a plate, literally. A slice of yesterday's bread hardened into a disc, meant to catch grease and crumbs beneath your stew. Only peasants eat the trenchers. You glance down. Your stew pools in the centre, soaking slowly into the dry crust. By the end of the meal, the trencher is heavy, sagging with juices, and then it too is taken away. Not thrown out. Given to the poor, or the dogs, or the servants waiting in the halls. And still, you're not allowed to eat it. The irony burns in your stomach harder than hunger. You're seated at one of the wealthiest tables in the known world, surrounded by silver, silks, and sculpted sugar beasts. And yet you can't eat the bread. Not the crusty round loaf. Not the trencher. Not even the crumbs, which are swept with a goose-feather brush into a silver tray, carried reverently away like holy relics. You sip your broth. It's warm, thin, barely flavoured. Your eyes wander back to the bread basket. Still full, still untouched, still perfuming the air like a cruel joke. One guest at the far end of the table dares. He tears a chunk from the crust of a round loaf, dips it in his stew and chews it openly. Bold, foolish. You watch closely. The Queen notices. Of course she does. She doesn't frown, doesn't flinch. She simply reaches for her wine, sips, and says softly, "Such hunger in such a gilded room." The man freezes. There's no punishment, no guards, no dramatic removal, but the message is clear, and when the next course is served, his plate is smaller, his wine diluted, his name omitted from the list read aloud before the evening's entertainment. He's been demoted. Because at this table, bread is not just food, it's politics. In many medieval and early modern courts, the way bread was handled reflected the very structure of society. The upper crust, a term that survives even today, was literally the part of the bread offered to nobles, while the base, tougher sections were for the lower classes. Some courts served bread in layers, the top for royalty, the middle for nobility, the bottom for servants, and no one dared eat outside their rank. Even breadcrumbs had their role. Collected, dried, ground, repurposed. Nothing wasted. Nothing shared without permission. You realise suddenly why the bread smells so good. It's not just the yeast or the warmth, it's the denial. You've been trained in just a few days to crave the one thing you can't touch. A loaf on a table becomes a ladder. You wonder, briefly, if anyone ever rose through the ranks by stealing a bite. But that's a different story. Tonight your trencher is gone, your bowl is empty, and your stomach still growls like a mutinous hound. But you smile, you nod, you say nothing. Because in this palace, bread is for the performance, not for the appetite. And tomorrow, maybe, you'll earn a seat 1 inch closer to the crust. Tonight's banquet feels different. Not in the food, it's still exotic, over-garnished and suspiciously room temperature, but in the seating. The moment you approach the long table, you're directed to a spot near the centre. Not close to the queen, not quite above the salt, but noticeably closer than last time. It's subtle, just 3 places nearer. But in court, 3 places might as well be a throne. You sit, straighten your collar, and that's when you see it. The salt. A new salt cellar has been placed before you. Smaller than the monarch's, of course. Less ornate, but still silver. Still engraved. Still sacred. You try not to stare. Because tonight the salt doesn't just tell people who you are. It tells them where you belong. And in this court, where you sit tells the whole story. The feast begins. The food is served. And right on cue, the ritual unfolds. Goblets lifted, dishes passed, toasts made, all flowing outward from the queen like ripples in a golden pond. But you can feel it now, more than before, how every motion at this table is dictated by your position. If you're too close to the monarch and speak too loudly, it's arrogance. Too far and silence becomes invisibility. You glance at the noble to your right and he raises an eyebrow, barely. But it's enough. The dish between you is a salad of herbs and pickled walnuts. You pass it carefully. To the right, of course, never to the left. You're learning. And then comes the moment you've been dreading. The serving of the salt. Not the tiny pinch offered in private at breakfast. No, this is the great ceremonial salt, passed from hand to hand with reverence, held like a relic, and only used with permission. The server approaches, nods to you. You nod back. He places the cellar before you. It's your turn. You reach, not for the salt itself, but for the tiny silver spoon beside it. Use it to lift the smallest possible measure. Sprinkle. No clumps, no spills, no mistakes. You place the spoon back in its notch and gently pass the cellar onward. No one gasps. No one stares. You did it right. And you realise you're not just eating anymore, you're participating. The salt passes down the line, trailing judgment in its wake. A young lady 2 seats down drops a few grains onto the velvet table runner. No one says anything aloud, but 3 eyebrows rise and a steward quietly swaps out the cloth between courses. That's how it works here. Mistakes aren't scolded, they're observed and remembered. You shift your attention back to the queen. She hasn't touched her salt at all, nor her meat, just the wine, which she lifts now and then, lips barely grazing the rim. Because here's the other thing about these meals. Status isn't just shown by what you eat, but what you don't eat. The queen abstains, refuses seconds, leaves her plate half full. Not because she's uninterested, but because abstaining shows restraint, power, control. She doesn't need to eat. Food comes to her. You glance back at your own plate. A glazed duck leg with orange and clove, rich, dark, roasted to perfection. But now you're hesitant, because too much enthusiasm looks greedy. and greed at court is dangerous. You slice the duck delicately, take one small bite, chew with reverence, set your fork down. Across the table, a duke devours his own portion in 4 eager bites. He licks his fingers, grins, and in that moment he looks common. The queen notices. Everyone notices. He won't be invited to the next private feast, because food isn't just nourishment here. It's currency, a compass, a conversation, and the salt. The salt is its own language. In some courts, it was so serious that there were books, literal manuals, written on how to approach the salt, from which side, with which hand, in what order. One wrong move could suggest rebellion, or insult, or worse, ambition. You wonder how many wars began over something as simple as who reached for the salt first. The meal continues, slowly, gracefully. A servant removes your plate before you've finished. That too is a message. It means you've had enough, that the court has seen you, counted your bites, and deemed you appropriately moderate. And then, at last, the final dish. A fruit tart topped with glazed quince and dusted with powdered sugar. But you don't reach for it. You wait. Because above all else, you've learned this. It's not about hunger. It's about knowing when not to eat. The queen rises. The room follows. Another dinner survived. Another inch climbed. You pass the now empty salt cellar one last time, and this time your reflection shines clearly in its polished side. You smile, a little. You've become quite good at surviving dinner. You know how to chew invisibly, how to sit just above the salt, how to pass a trench of lukewarm pottage with royal grace. But none of that prepares you for tonight, because tonight the food has teeth. Not literally, of course, but it feels like it. Every dish that arrives is a puzzle, or worse, a trap. The first course is innocent enough. A pastry, delicate, gold-leafed. You expect it to be filled with cream. It explodes. Not violently, just alarmingly. Inside the flaky crust is a puff of saffron and hot pepper, which shoots into the air the moment your knife breaks the surface. The man beside you yelps. Someone coughs. You blink through the yellow mist now hovering over your plate like a spicy ghost. Everyone applauds politely. Apparently, this was intentional. Tonight's meal has a theme: spectacle. These are the Hunger Games of the high table. Not a feast, but a flex. A demonstration of wealth, wit, and culinary danger. You steel yourself. The second dish arrives. A melon carved into a knight on horseback. Impressive. Until you realise the horse is made from squid and the melon is pickled. You take a cautious bite. It's like chewing a leather shoe soaked in vinegar and regret. You smile, you chew, you swallow. The others nod approvingly. This is the game, and you're playing it. By the third course, the kitchen has clearly lost its mind. A creature appears, 3 heads stitched together. A chimera, goat, rooster, rabbit. Each section cooked differently. The rabbit is stewed, the goat is roasted, the rooster is raw. You pause. The server whispers, "Symbolic, my lord." Of what exactly, you have no idea, but symbolism is a powerful shield at court. If a dish makes no sense, it's probably a metaphor. And if you don't understand it, it's probably because you're not supposed to. So you nod. Cut a tiny square from the rabbit's side, swallow. Do not look at the rooster's eye staring up from the plate. You try to breathe through your nose and not think too much. Because the next course arrives with a flourish, carried in on a platter of mirrors. Yes, mirrors. You blink. It reflects the entire table. Flickering candlelight, powdered wigs, glinting eyes, and steaming. What is that? The dish is called Serpent of the Moon. It's a long coiled sausage dyed an eerie shade of blue-grey. resting in a puddle of black sauce so glossy you can see your own worried expression in it. Someone whispers, "It's meant to represent wisdom." Another replies, "Or betrayal." You take a small piece. It's spiced with cloves and crushed almonds, oddly sweet, and then, midway through the chew, you hit a sliver of something crunchy. Bone, nutshell. You don't ask. You chew, eyes forward, hands steady. Because you've come too far to flinch now, but deep down you understand this isn't just a meal, it's a battlefield, plated and painted, layered in symbolism, danger, and theatre. These dishes aren't designed to nourish, they're designed to test, to see who can endure the unfamiliar, who can navigate the grotesque with poise, who can swallow without complaint, because if you can survive this, you can survive anything. The final course arrives, a roasted apple, plain and golden, resting on a bed of leaves. Simple, elegant, too simple. You cut into it, slowly, and find the core filled with meat. Pork, spiced, warm. The sweetness of the fruit collapses into the savour of fat and thyme. It's not bad, actually. Startling, yes, but oddly comforting. And for a moment, you forget where you are. You take another bite, larger this time. Then you stop. Too late. You've committed the evening's cardinal sin. You've shown pleasure. Across the table, a noble smirks behind his goblet. Another raises an eyebrow. The queen's eyes don't move, but the corner of her mouth tightens, because enthusiasm is uncouth. Refinement demands detachment. Even from joy, you dab your lips, compose yourself. The platter is removed. The mirrored tray rolls away, reflecting nothing but shadows now. And as the candles are snuffed, you feel a strange sense of pride. You've endured the court of edible illusions, where pigeons wear armour, sauces glow green, and fruit bleeds meat, where your appetite is your enemy, and your restraint is your crown. You're not full, you're not even sure what you ate, but you survived, and tonight that's enough. You'd think a meal couldn't get any more exhausting, but you haven't faced the 17-course standoff yet. Yes, 17. Not 7, not 3 and a polite exit. 17. Each course meticulously timed, ceremoniously served, and absolutely mandatory. Tonight is a state banquet, the kind hosted when foreign dignitaries arrive or treaties are being paraded around like well-fed peacocks. And this particular feast? It's a marathon, a public display of opulence, endurance, and patience disguised as hospitality. The table is endless. The chandeliers have been doubled. Musicians are tucked in every corner, plucking gently to keep the mood from collapsing under the weight of everyone's lower back pain. You are seated, not too far from the front, but not quite in the people who will definitely not be poisoned zone. Somewhere in the middle, like always. Course 1, wine and wafers. Simple, soft, you can do this. Course 2, a tiny soup in a gilded cup. You sip, you smile. Then comes the slow march of unrelenting food. Course 3, cold fish with violet petals. Course 4, artichoke hearts pressed into the shape of a crown. Course 5, quail stuffed with grapes, the eyes still in. You chew, sip, chew, smile, chew. Every few courses, you're offered a napkin soaked in rose water to refresh the senses. It does nothing. You're already sweating under your collar. By course 7, your belt feels tighter. By course 8, the room starts to blur around the edges. But you cannot leave. You must not. Because here's the rule no one dares break. You're not allowed to excuse yourself during a royal meal. Not for the privy. Not for a coughing fit. Not even if your foot has fallen asleep and you can feel your soul slipping through the floorboards. If the queen remains seated, so do you. If her goblet stays full, so does yours. You once heard about a Hungarian ambassador who dared to leave during the 11th course to adjust his hat. He was never invited back. His nation's trade deal was quietly shelved for 6 years. You glance at the Queen. She hasn't moved. She hasn't even eaten, but she's watching. Your spine aches. Your jaw is numb. You're starting to suspect that the room's candles are being replenished not for light, but because the meal is long enough to outlast them. Course 10 arrives. Duck eggs dyed blue, resting in a nest of sugared twigs. It's beautiful. It's absurd. You can barely taste it. Course 11. A pie so heavily decorated with gold leaf it crunches like tinsel. Course 12. A warm custard inside a hollowed-out turnip. Why a turnip? You don't know. No one knows. And yet, every dish is praised. Not too loudly, of course. But with the ritual murmur of approval, soft nods, eyes closed briefly. The occasional exquisite. By course 13, you feel lightheaded. And yet, you're required to remain composed. Because by this point in the meal, grace becomes a performance of stamina. 1. Misstep. Elbows out, slouching, fidgeting, and it signals weakness. The man 2 seats down has unbuttoned his collar. Small mistake. Tiny. But you see the glances. The courtiers note it. A footman whispers to another. You pour more wine, pretending not to notice. Course 14. Pigeon pâté moulded into the shape of a royal seal. You slice delicately, hoping no one realizes you're just pushing it around your plate. Course 15. Candied rose petals atop a mound of cream cheese. The sweetness cloys. You swallow with effort. Course 16. Hot cider served in hollowed apples. It burns pleasantly. You begin to feel your strength return. Too soon. Because then comes course 17, the final dish. Everyone straightens. Goblets are set down. Servants approach in synchrony. Silver lids are lifted to reveal nothing. Empty plates. A pause. Confusion flickers. Then the Queen raises her goblet and speaks. Let restraint be our final course. Ah, a message. The final dish isn't food at all. It's virtue. It's moderation, served with a wink. And now you're meant to smile, applaud gently, and pretend this was the perfect ending. You do. You clap. You nod. You're starving. But no one leaves yet. Because after the feast comes the true final course, the sitting. You remain at the table for a full hour, talking softly, smiling tightly, holding your seat like it's a throne carved from stone. Your stomach grumbles. No one hears, or pretends not to. And when, at last, you're dismissed, the relief is almost spiritual. You stagger out of the hall, past the mirrors, past the musicians still plucking the same lullaby they began 4 hours ago. You survived all 17, and the invisible 18th, the course called Patience. The morning after the 17-course gauntlet, you skip breakfast. Not out of dignity, simply out of self-defense. Your stomach is in open rebellion. Your tongue, coated in a confused film of duck fat, rose water and turnip custard, refuses to cooperate. You find yourself craving something plain, something real, but instead you're summoned again. Not to a meal this time, but to observe one. It's not your day to eat. Today, it's your turn to witness the redistribution. You're brought to a chamber behind the kitchens. Simple. Stone floors, no gold, no music, and laid out on long wooden tables is a parade of leftovers, half loaves of trencher bread, bone stripped but not gnawed, bits of pie crust, meat clinging to corners. It's a buffet, yes, but not for nobles. These remains are about to be sorted, tallied and handed off to servants, guards, monks, messengers, even the palace dogs. But there are rules. So many rules. The Queen's untouched meat, that goes to the royal physician who studies it to infer her humoral condition. The marrow bones from the nobles' platters, sent to the kitchens for broth, the trencher breads, passed through a system so elaborate it might as well have required a flowchart. From hall to steward, steward to page, page to clerk, Clerk to chapel, chapel to the poor. But not all leftovers are equal. Some are off limits entirely. The salt? Never shared. Even the grains on the rim of the cellar are swept into a private container. The sugar sculptures? Often destroyed to avoid theft. You watch a steward snap a swan's spun sugar beak and drop the shards into a locked box. Because in a royal court, even crumbs can spark envy. A fight once broke out, so the story goes, between two kitchen boys over the rind of a cheese that had been near the Queen's plate. Not touched, not tasted, just near. And yet, that was enough to make it sacred. You shiver. Because here's the truth. Leftovers are not trash in a palace. They are status. And for those who live below the table, scraps are more than food. They're hope. You linger by the door as the redistribution continues. It's like watching a ritual, measured, hushed, more church than kitchen. One by one, servants approach a steward with small wooden trays. They don't speak. They bow. They wait. Each tray is filled according to unwritten hierarchy. A strip of quail for the chambermaid, a bone with a sliver of venison for the stable boy. 2 soaked trenchers for the scribes who copy royal documents all night by candlelight. It's strangely moving and vaguely terrifying, because you realise that the court doesn't end at the edge of the dining hall. It continues downward, outward, through hallways and side doors and cellars, where the people who make the palace run must guess at their worth, based on how much gristle or goose skin ends up on their tray. You spot a guard peeking in. He's tall, armoured, sunburned, but his eyes dart like a child's. He's hoping for a bit of duck leg. When the steward hands him only a crust of pie, he nods, thanks him, walks away without blinking, no protest, no question, because here, to complain about your portion is to question the Queen's generosity. Even the leftovers are political, and there's an art to who gets what. A sweetmeat might be sent to the chaplain, a subtle way of securing forgiveness before a diplomatic betrayal. An extra slice of beef to a visiting page, a soft bribe to ensure a foreign letter reaches the right desk. You watch a slice of pear tart disappear into a cloth and get handed to a courier who pockets it with the care of someone carrying state secrets. Because sometimes he is. Food here isn't just nourishment or indulgence. It's currency, a message, a ledger. And in this unwritten economy, even the napkin you used to spit out a bitter fig could hold meaning. No one wastes anything, not the crust, not the crumbs, not the story those crumbs tell. Later you pass through the lower kitchens on your way back to your chambers, and there, by the stone hearth, you see the dogs, 3 of them, massive, royal, trained to stand still unless given command. They're being fed the bones from last night's banquet. Not the prime cuts, no, but better than what most people outside the palace will eat this week. You pause, because for the briefest moment you envy them. They don't worry about etiquette, or salt cellars, or who saw them chew. They just eat, and in this palace that's a kind of freedom. By now you've survived explosive pastries, edible illusions, political salt rituals, and 17 straight courses without using the privy. You've learned to chew in silence, to swallow insult with broth, to climb the ladder of seating with the delicate art of pretending not to want anything. But tonight, you're handed something that should be simple, familiar, a fruit. It rests gently on a silver dish, an apricot, perfect, slightly warm, dusty gold with a blush of pink, the skin still on, the stem curled like a tiny hook. You hesitate, because nothing is simple in this place. And fruit, you're beginning to realise, is a diplomatic grenade with a sugar crust. The Queen picks up her own fruit, a fig. You pause. Is that a sign? You look to your neighbour. He has a plum. Another has a pomegranate. A visiting ambassador is struggling with what appears to be an overripe mango, unfamiliar and unwieldy. You glance down at your apricot and wonder, where did it come from? Who sent it? Why this fruit tonight? In court, fruit is never just fruit. It's a gift from a foreign dignitary, a symbol of fertility, or wealth, or alliance. A gesture from one house to another, and if you eat it too quickly, it can suggest desperation if you ignore it. Insult, peel it the wrong way, that's cultural offence. The Queen once famously left a pear untouched for 3 nights in a row, an unspoken refusal of a political marriage. The 4th night the pear was removed, and so was the proposal. You pick up your apricot carefully. It's soft, ripe, ready. But you hesitate, because even in its simplicity it's a performance. You take a slow bite, making sure the skin peels slightly under your teeth. Not too much juice, no drips, no chewing noises. Sweet. Silky. You glance up. No one reacts. That's good. You've passed the first test. The apricot sits in your hand like a glowing secret. You've taken one bite, enough to acknowledge it, not enough to devour it. This is the delicate part. Because now every gesture with this fruit speaks volumes. If you finish it too quickly, you look greedy. Leave it half-eaten, you risk insulting its sender, discard the pit. That could be seen as throwing away a token of alliance. You take another small bite and pray that no one notices the pit beginning to show. Because yes, even the pit has meaning. In some courts, it's custom to wrap the pit in linen and return it to the host, a symbol of good faith, proof that the offering was accepted and not poisoned. In others, it's buried in the garden outside the great hall, symbolizing planted friendship, sown trust. In the Spanish court, a noble once offended a visiting Venetian by tossing a cherry stone into the fireplace. An hour later, the Venetian ambassador withdrew his support for a trade pact. So you do what you've learned to do best, stall. You place the apricot delicately back on the silver dish, pit facing inward, flesh facing out, a little exposed, but not indecent, and you leave it there, elegant, neutral, alive with meaning, but not specific enough to accuse you of anything. Beside you, the ambassador is still struggling with the mango. It's slippery. He wipes his hands. A servant offers a cloth. Too late. A drop of juice has already landed on his cuff. The Queen sees it. A smile, faint, almost imperceptible, touches the corner of her mouth. That's all. But it's everything. Because now the ambassador knows his mango betrayed him. And tomorrow's negotiations will be a little less friendly. You sit straighter. Because now you understand. Fruit is the final battlefield, not because it's difficult to eat, but because it looks easy. It lulls you with sweetness, softness, familiarity. But within it lies the question, will you eat it? How will you eat it? And who is watching when you do? You press your fingers to the silver dish, gently nudge the apricot stem upright. No more bites, no less. Exactly what the moment required. And when the steward removes your plate, he does so with a nod, respectful, wordless. You passed, the apricot passed, and your position at the table, like the fruit, remains intact. Tonight you're thirsty, not just parched, but deeply, soulfully dry. After weeks of broths, dust-dry trenchers, sugared meats, and ceremonial rosewater, your body aches for one simple, honest thing. A glass of cold water. But when you ask a servant, quietly, humbly, just a whisper, he looks at you like you've requested mud. Water, my lord, he repeats gently. Would you not prefer wine? You blink. Of course, wine is available. Always. There's wine in crystal, wine in pewter, wine so aged it could vote. But none of it quenches. None of it cleanses. I'll take water, you say. He bows, vanishes. 10 minutes later he returns, and sets before you a delicate goblet of broth, hot, meaty, oily, not even close to what you ask for. Because here's the truth no one admits. Royals didn't drink water, not publicly, not proudly. For centuries, water was considered unclean, not because it was muddy, but because it was common, peasant stuff, drawn from streams, poured from buckets, carried in sloshing jugs. Wine was refined. Ale, noble. Broth, hearty. Even milk, when warmed and spiced, had its place. But water was for animals, or worse, for those with nothing else. You glance around. Everyone is sipping. Some wine, some beer, some posset made with curdled milk and nutmeg. No one touches water, except the Queen. And even then, only at night, alone, in a silver cup lined with herbs, not at the table, not in public. You lean back, accept the broth, sip it slowly. It warms you, but it doesn't help. Still, you don't ask again, because the court doesn't thirst the way you do. Here, thirst is weakness, water is suspicion, and simplicity is dangerous. You remember a story told in a whisper, something about a visiting prince who requested only water during a state banquet, said he was cleansing, said it was his custom. By the end of the evening, everyone had a theory. He must be ill, or hiding something, or plotting something. Maybe he thought the wine was poisoned. Maybe he was the one bringing poison. By the next morning, his entire entourage had been relocated to the East Wing. His seat at the next banquet, gone. 1 cup of water, and he was never trusted again. So here, in this palace of taste and appearance, water is a ghost. It flows behind the scenes, steeped with herbs, boiled into broths, hidden in fruits, but never honoured on its own. And yet, your body begs for it. You find yourself taking larger bites of melon at the fruit course, letting the jellies melt longer on your tongue, even chewing more slowly just to extract some kind of moisture. One night, when you're seated beside a foreign ambassador, he leans toward you between courses. They don't drink water, he mutters. That's why they look so old by 40. You almost laugh, except he's not wrong. The Queen's eyes gleam with cunning, but the skin around them is tired. The noble's cheeks are painted pink, but beneath it you see dryness, cracks. There's a tension in the room that comes not just from politics, but from dehydration. It turns people brittle, and still, they keep sipping wine. Because to ask for water is to appear unsophisticated, weak, unworthy of the silk and the salt and the 20-course illusions. Even the palace dogs are given gravy. You learn to accept it, to train your body to endure, to let the wine burn a little, to smile when the servants offer another round of refreshment. And late at night in your chambers, you pour yourself a single cup. From a jug you hide behind a tapestry, cooled by the stone wall, drawn not from the palace cellar but from the rain barrel outside. And when it touches your lips, it's the first real truth you've tasted in weeks. Clear, silent, honest. You drink slowly. And for a moment, you remember who you were before the court began rewriting your instincts. Before wine was survival and thirst was strategy. Before water became rebellion. Your legs ache, your back twinges. But it's your gut that bears the worst of it. You've been eating on someone else's schedule, someone else's menu, someone else's idea of what a human body should tolerate. And the result? Nothing's moving. Or, worse, everything is moving too slowly. You walk the palace corridors with that strange heavy stiffness known only to those trapped in a world of rich sauces, dry meats, and not a single raw vegetable in sight. At first, you think it's just you. Maybe your body is weak. Maybe you weren't meant for court life. But then you overhear a page boy whispering outside the Queen's private chambers, "They're sending for the syrup of figs again." Ah, not just you then. Because here's a little-known truth about royal life. Everyone's constipated. The diet of a noble is not kind to the bowels. Between the mountains of roasted game, the mountains of marzipan, and the absence of anything that crunches, digestion becomes a courtly struggle, and that's where the next rule kicks in. The unspoken, uncomfortable, deeply personal rule. Your stools are political. Yes. In some royal households, particularly the obsessive ones like the court of Louis the Aurorus, there were actual records of the monarch's bowel movements, noted, logged, timed. If the king had not gone in 2 days, the entire kitchen changed its strategy. Fewer meats, more stewed prunes, boiled apples, spiced rhubarb in syrup, sometimes even ritual enemas. You pass a steward holding a silver bowl. Inside it, a thin, soupy compote of dates and fennel. You don't ask. You already know. Tonight's dinner begins with a curious shift. A bowl of lentil porridge, a plate of gently steamed carrots, a tea made with something vaguely herbal. This is the purge course. Subtle, scented, gentle on the tongue, but with an intention sharper than any knife on the table. You sip, you chew. Everyone does. No one mentions why. Because in this palace you don't talk about digestion. You manage it. Quietly. Like grief. Or guilt. The palace has its rhythms, meals, ceremonies, prayers. But hidden beneath them is a second rhythm. Slower. Quieter. The rhythm of the royal bowels. After dinner you notice it. A subtle shift in the energy of the court. Guests retreat earlier. Conversations grow thin. Goblets are left half full, because everyone's waiting for something to move. In your chambers, you've been given a small velvet pouch, tied neatly, sealed with wax. Inside, a personal remedy prepared by the Queen's apothecary. Dried plums, senna leaf, powdered licorice. It's labelled in looping script to aid the gentle descent. You stare at it longer than you should, because the truth is, nothing in the palace is untouched by protocol, not even your digestion. You think of the groom of the stool, that strange intimate position in some royal households, a man whose sole job was to assist the monarch with matters of exit. He didn't just clean. He listened, took notes, reported back. In many ways, he was the most trusted advisor in the realm, because when food becomes politics, waste becomes a state secret. And here you are, clutching your velvet pouch of gentle descent, wondering if your own intestinal performance will be interpreted as loyalty or betrayal. You remember the story of a duchess who was rumoured to have fainted at court, not from illness, but because she hadn't been permitted a moment of privacy in 4 days, not until the Queen herself gave the look. The servants had cleared a space behind a tapestry. She was escorted discreetly with 2 ladies in waiting, a portable stool and a fan to mask the sound. Power, you realise, isn't always about what you eat. Sometimes it's about whether you're allowed to get rid of it. The next morning you rise early. A tray has been left outside your door. Porridge, stewed rhubarb, warm water with lemon, a quiet message. You smile. Because in this palace, even your stomach answers to the crown. You've come a long way. You've mastered silent chewing. You've survived jellied castles, 17-course standoffs and mango diplomacy. You've learned how to eat without eating, how to chew without being seen, how to pass the salt like it's a scroll of royal succession. And yet, despite all this, you still don't get to choose your own meal. Not a single dish, not one ingredient. Everything placed before you is chosen, curated, measured, controlled. Tonight, you see it more clearly than ever. You're handed a dish of unfamiliar meat. Roasted, spiced, sliced into perfect little rounds. You don't recognise the flavour. It could be pheasant, partridge, or something rarer. But when you ask the steward what it is, he smiles with a slight bow. Tonight's provision has been selected by Her Majesty's Dietary Secretary, according to the physician's book and the planetary hour. You blink. The what? Turns out the Queen's meals are planned not just by her taste, but by astrology, health charts, mood, phase of the moon, and occasionally by omen, and everyone else's plate follows suit. You're not eating what you want, you're eating what the Queen's astrologer thinks you should. It's Tuesday, Mars rules, so no pork, root vegetables for grounding, and nothing too wet, as it may unbalance the spleen. You take a bite, it's fine, but something about it feels strange. Not the taste, the fact of it. You didn't choose it. You weren't even consulted, and this isn't new. For centuries, monarchs and nobles alike had dietary governors, entire teams of doctors, priests, cooks and clerks, whose sole job was to decide what went into the royal body and when. Because food wasn't nourishment, it was medicine, protection, policy. You drink the wine offered, not the one you like, but the one assigned to you. You glance at the Queen. She lifts her fork, tastes one morsel, and sets it down. Her plate is removed instantly. That too was planned, a signal. The rest of the hall moves forward. New course, new mood. You sigh. Not because the food is bad, but because it's not yours. You start to wonder if you even remember what hunger feels like anymore. Not the dull ache in your stomach. That's familiar enough. But real hunger, the kind where you crave something specific, decide, choose. Because here, in this palace, that choice has been taken from you. A servant brings you a small bowl next. Pale broth, no garnish, no explanation. You sip. It's vaguely mushroomy. This is for clarity of thought, the steward murmurs, on account of Mercury's influence. You nod, as if that makes sense. You've begun to notice a pattern. After diplomatic arguments, soothing soups, before war councils, heavy meats and red wine, during illness in the royal line, bitter greens, fasts and spoonfuls of something sharp that tastes like iron and sorrow. Food isn't pleasure, it's strategy, and your body is the battlefield. You ask once if you can have more of something, just a simple fruit you liked, a pear. The steward bows, apologizes. Not in season. It is in season. You saw a basket of them in the lower hall, but it's not on the Queen's approved list this week, and if it's not on hers, it's not on yours. In another court you once heard, a noble woman requested eggs at the wrong hour. The court physician declared her blood heated and disordered. She was advised to rest, withdraw. She did not return to public meals for 3 months. Because here, to eat the wrong thing at the wrong time is not a personal choice. It's a breach of order. You begin to fantasize about food, not roasted swans or jellied fish, just bread with crust, cheese that sweats a little, apples with dirt still clinging to their skins. One night, in a dream, you peel a boiled potato with your hands and eat it over the sink. It's the best thing you've never tasted. And when you wake, the breakfast tray holds rosehip jam, an oat cake, and a spoon carved from bone. You eat it quietly, dutifully, and wonder what the stars have planned for your digestion today. Tonight the palace is silent, heavier somehow. The musicians play slower. The air smells of wax and damp velvet, and you know, without anyone saying it, that something has happened. No one speaks of it directly. But the Queen is dressed in darker hues. The steward's eyes are glassy. The servants move with extra care, as if even a dropped spoon might cause offence. Still, the feast continues. It must. Because here in the palace, ritual must override reality. And so, the guests file in. The goblets are filled, the plates are placed, but the food tonight, it's chosen with intent. You recognise the pattern instantly. Mild, palatable, safe, nothing that can go wrong. A clear broth, a white fish, a scoop of barley with mint, all familiar, gentle, manageable. Because tonight isn't about impressing anyone. Tonight is about avoiding mistakes. And as the meal progresses, you realise the strange truth of it. Even now, you're not allowed to choose. Not your food, not your words, not even your expression. You're expected to mirror the mood. If the queen smiles, you smile. If she doesn't eat, you don't either. Across the table, someone lifts their fork too soon. A subtle breach, nothing wild, but enough. A steward leans in and murmurs, the fork is lowered, even grief here is structured, graded, refined. You chew slowly, thoughtfully. You keep your eyes soft, your posture composed, because tonight etiquette is not about elegance, it's about containment. This is not a meal, it's a lid on a boiling pot, and then a guest to your right breaks the spell. I remember, she says softly, when he asked for gooseberries at Winter Feast, just to be contrary. No one laughs, but someone nods. The queen lifts her goblet, not for a toast, just a sip. And in that gesture, you're reminded again, this meal is not for the body, it's for the memory. The courses continue, but they feel like echoes. Each dish is a shadow of something richer, something once celebratory. A veal stew, but without spice. A pear tart, but without glaze. A wine diluted with herbal water, so faint it tastes like memory. You take each bite with the reverence of a ritual, not because the food is remarkable, but because you sense that every gesture tonight is a form of mourning. And still, you're not told what happened. No one says the name. No one explains the sombre music or the saltless meat or the queen's steady silence. Because the court doesn't deal in directness. It speaks in substitutions. The absence of garlic, grief, the presence of boiled dandelion greens, a sign of cleansing, the omission of the rosewater custard, deliberate, symbolic. You glance again at your plate. A single fig, halved and resting on a bed of white cheese. It looks untouched. You remember the fig from earlier this month, served whole and honeyed, decadent and sticky. Now, cold, plain, split open like something confessed. You don't eat it, and that is the correct decision. Because in court, choosing not to eat can be as meaningful as a speech. Your neighbour makes the mistake. He eats the fig, not greedily, just absent-mindedly. There's a silence, a shift. The queen doesn't look up. She doesn't need to. The steward's expression hardens just slightly. The server next to the fig eater lingers a moment too long with the water jug. That's all it takes. The damage is done. Because even food becomes a moment of loyalty or betrayal. What you eat, when you eat it, if you eat it. It all speaks. You set your fig aside, touch your napkin lightly to your lips, and the meal continues. No applause, no second glances. But when the final course is served, almond milk and white bread, you're among the first to be served. A quiet sign, a small rise. Because you understood what the others missed. Sometimes, the most powerful act at the table is restraint. You're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the kind that settles into your bones after weeks of sitting tall, chewing quietly, swallowing symbolism with every bite. You know the rules now. You know how to survive this place. But tonight, the palace will remind you why the rules exist. Because sometimes they kill. The banquet begins like any other. Low music, flickering candles, cold peacocks no one will touch. You've seen it all before. You're seated farther up the table than ever, closer to the queen, a place of privilege and danger. You glance at the guests. Everyone is too quiet, too still. Something's off. The first course is soup, light, clear. poured from silver ewers. You lift your spoon. Sip. The man across from you, Lord Colden, if you remember correctly, does the same. 10 seconds pass, then 20. And then suddenly he stiffens. Not dramatically, just a twitch. A blink too slow. A hand that hesitates as it reaches for bread. You see it. Others do too, but no one moves. Because this is how it begins, when someone follows the rules a little too well. Lord Colden continues to sit upright. He takes another spoonful. His mouth is tight. His hand trembles. The Queen says nothing. She glances toward him only once. By the second course he's begun to sweat. By the third his napkin slips to the floor, and he doesn't bend to retrieve it. You remember the stories. The Duke who died from poisoned quince. The lady who collapsed after a dish of salted almonds. All of them had followed the rules to the letter, never questioned, never paused, never stopped to wonder if obedience might be the trap. The roasted partridge is served. You touch it with your knife, but don't eat. Colden, still playing his part, slices neatly, eats a bite. And then he slumps. No drama. Just a slow fold. A servant is at his side instantly. A quiet murmur, a nod, and then the body is removed. The music never stops. No one cries out. No one even raises a glass. The chair is cleared, the plate removed. A new cushion is smoothed over the vacant seat, and within minutes the place Lord Colden once filled is erased. You keep your face still, your breathing steady, but inside you're shaking. Because now, more than ever, you understand the danger. Sometimes the rules aren't meant to keep you safe. They're meant to keep them safe, to make sure you die politely. You glance at your soup bowl. You didn't finish it. You remember the flavour, bland, slightly metallic. You wonder now if that was just poor seasoning, or something more. No one will ask questions. Colden was old, they'll say. Or he had a weak constitution. Or he offended someone, and the kitchen simply misunderstood the instruction. You think of the Queen. She hasn't eaten all night. She rarely does. Because the most powerful person at the table is often the one who doesn't eat at all. Later, in the quiet corridors, you hear whispers, servants muttering about, misplaced menus, a steward being sent away for retraining, but the truth won't be recorded. It will be buried with the bones. Tomorrow there will be a new guest in Colden's place, a new smile, a new fork lifted at precisely the right moment, and no one will mention the fall. You lie awake that night, staring at the ceiling of your chamber. The tapestry flutters faintly in the breeze. Your stomach is hollow. Your mouth tastes of burnt sugar and fear. You've made it through. Again. But now you know, in this palace it is not enough to eat correctly, not enough to chew invisibly, not enough to pass the salt or decline the fig or master the 17-course patience ritual. You must always know when to stop, even when the rules say go, especially then. And so, you make a new rule, your own, private one. Never finish a dish, never eat the first bite, and never trust anything too well seasoned. Tomorrow the feast will begin again. The music, the gold, the apricots, the roast capons parading in on chariots. But tonight you survive. And that, in this world of etiquette and artifice, is the most forbidden indulgence of all. You lived, and now you can let it all fade. The clink of goblets, the glare of gilded platters, the waxy smile of the courtiers, let them blur, soften, disappear. You've walked through banquet halls filled with illusions, tiptoed across salt lines and symbolic jellies. You've outlasted poisoned courses, pear-shaped politics, and the heavy silence of meals soaked in meaning. You've been hungry, you've been full, but more than anything, you've been watched. Every chew, every swallow, every choice, measured, judged. But here, now, no one is watching. You don't need to sit tall. You don't need to fold your napkin just so. You don't even need to finish your plate. You can rest. You've earned it. Let the Queen's music play without you. Let the servants clear away the empty chairs and uneaten pears. Let the candlelight flicker one last time on a silver dish no one dares to touch. Breathe in and out. Let your body return to itself, to hunger that is yours, to silence that is not suspicious, to a world where food is food and survival is not performance. You're safe now. No more etiquette, no more rules, no more roast peacock with fireworks in its beak. Just sleep. And the quiet thought, if you ever return to the palace, you'll know exactly what not to eat.